The galaxy was vast, filled with millions of stars and countless worlds. Among them lived many species, each different in form, language, and culture. Some were peaceful, some were strong, and some were wise. Yet for centuries they had lived under a single shadow, a power so great and so cruel that no one dared to speak against it. This power was known as the Zirath Dominion. The Dominion was not a nation of peace or fairness. It was built on fear. Its rulers believed that only terror could keep control over the galaxy. Its armies, known as the Krylok Enforcers, marched from world to world, taking what they wanted, breaking those who resisted, and silencing every voice that tried to rise. They erased cultures, burned histories, and forced species to kneel. Entire civilizations disappeared under their rule, their names forgotten except in secret whispers. The Krylok themselves were large, scaled creatures with thick armor-like skin and glowing red eyes. Their claws could tear through steel, and their voices carried sharp commands that shook even the bravest soldiers of other species. Wherever they went, silence followed. Citizens lowered their eyes, afraid to draw attention. Families stayed hidden. Children were taught not to ask questions, only to obey. That was life in the Dominion. No one remembered a time before their rule. To most, the Dominion was eternal, like the stars themselves. Resistance had been tried many times, but always crushed with merciless speed. A city would rise against them, only to vanish the next day in fire. A planet would call for freedom, only to be punished until its surface was ash and dust. Hope was rare, and those who carried it were hunted. Fear was not just a weapon, it was the air everyone breathed. But then came a new species, small in number compared to the great empires, fragile in body compared to many others, yet strange in their ways. They were called humans. At first, the Dominion paid little attention to them. Humanity's homeworld was far from the central trade routes. Their ships were still new to the stars, and their colonies small compared to ancient galactic powers. To the Dominion they looked weak, soft, unprepared for the cruel games of the galaxy. They would fall like all the others. Or so the Dominion believed, yet humans were not like the others. Where most species bowed in silence, humans questioned. Where fear was expected, humans resisted. They argued, they adapted, they refused to forget who they were. Even in the darkest times they clung to one another. They remembered their dead, honored them, and swore never to let their sacrifices be meaningless. And most dangerous of all, they had a strange ability to fight harder after suffering loss. The Dominion did not understand this. To them, grief was weakness. To humans, grief was fire. On the colony world of EpicSciFiTales, life carried on under the shadow of Dominion patrols. The planet had been a place of beauty once. Green valleys, silver rivers, and skies that glowed with twin moons. When humans first arrived, they built homes side by side with other refugees who had escaped the Dominion's cruelty. They shared food, stories, and laughter, trying to build a life of peace. But peace was never permanent where the Dominion ruled. Krylok ships often landed in the capital city, demanding tribute, supplies, and sometimes people. No one was safe from their orders. The people of EpicSciFiTales endured in silence, hoping each day would pass without disaster. Parents whispered to their children to stay inside, to keep their voices low, to never look at the soldiers. It was a fragile way to live, but it was survival. Among those children was a little boy named Elias. He was no different from any child, curious, playful, and full of dreams about the stars. He loved to run along the riverside, chasing glowing insects that danced at night. He often asked his father about the ships in the sky, and whether one day he would fly among them. His mother smiled and told him to be patient, that his time would come. To Elias, the galaxy was not yet a place of fear. It was a place of wonder, but even children could not escape the Dominion's gaze. On a cold morning, a Dominion patrol entered the settlement. Their ship landed with a roar of engines scattering dust into the air. The people gathered silently as they always did, waiting for the demands. The Krylok leader stepped forward, his armor shining dark under the sun. His voice cut through the crowd like a blade. You will provide food, minerals, and laborers. Refusal will not be tolerated. The settlers nodded. They had no choice. They began to gather supplies, carrying crates and containers toward the soldiers. Fear was heavy in the air, pressing down on everyone. No one dared to speak. But children did not always understand fear. Elias, holding a small carved toy starship, wandered closer to see the giant soldiers. To him, they looked like characters from one of his father's stories. Terrible, yes, but fascinating. He tugged at his mother's sleeve, but she was too focused on keeping her head down. Elias took a few steps forward. One of the Krylok enforcers noticed. His red eyes glowed as he snarled, "Keep your young away." The boy froze, but it was too late. In the silence of the square, every sound seemed louder. Elias dropped his toy ship, and it clattered on the stones. The soldier mistook the movement for defiance. With a swift motion, he struck. The crowd gasped. The boy fell. Time stopped. The mother screamed, rushing forward, but other settlers held her back, their own eyes wide with horror. The Krylok officer gave no explanation, no apology. To him it was nothing, a warning, a reminder of fear. He stepped past the boy's still form, ordering his troops to continue their work. The people lowered their heads again. Some wept silently. No one resisted. That was the way of the Dominion. But this time was different. Hidden among the settlers were human traders and workers. They saw the child. They saw the mother's cries. They saw the indifference of the soldiers. And though fear gripped their hearts, something deeper stirred within them. Anger. They did not cry out. They did not move. But they remembered. They carried the story back with them, across ships and colonies until all of humanity knew. A child had been killed. Not a soldier. Not a fighter. A child. And that was the spark. The Dominion had ruled for centuries through terror. They had crushed rebellions, silenced voices, and broken spirits. But they had never faced a people who turned grief into resolve. They had never faced humans. From that day forward, the galaxy would never be the same. Because the death of one human child was about to unleash a storm that no empire, no matter how powerful, could survive. The news did not remain on Arivos Prime for long. Stories had wings, and among humans, memories traveled faster than ships. The settlers whispered to traders, the traders carried tales to pilots, and the pilots took them to distant colonies. At first it was spoken in quiet voices, about a Krylok officer, about a mother's scream, about a little boy named Elias who would never see the stars. But whispers have a way of growing louder. By the time the first reports reached Earth itself, the story was no longer a secret. It was a spark, and humanity was dry wood waiting to burn. On Earth, in the capital city of Geneva, leaders of the human nations gathered. For decades they had argued over borders, resources, and politics. Humanity had never been truly united. Old rivalries had always lingered. But now, as they listened to the recordings and testimonies from Arivos Prime, silence filled the great hall. The hollow screen displayed the mother's voice, cracked with grief, and the lifeless body of the child being carried away. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, Admiral Kalen Rourke of the Terran Defense Fleet rose to his feet. His voice was low but steady. "They killed a child," he said. "Not in battle, not by mistake. They did it to remind us of fear, and if we remain silent, they will believe fear still works." Some leaders shifted uneasily. The Dominion was powerful. Their fleets were vast, their armies endless. No species had ever defeated them. To challenge them was to invite destruction. But others nodded. Minister Alina Joe of the Pacific Alliance leaned forward, her eyes bright. "If we do nothing, then every child in every colony will live under the same shadow. We will not only lose our freedom, we will lose our humanity." The room filled with voices. Some argued for caution, others for war. Yet beneath the debate, one truth was clear. Humanity could not forget what had happened. In the colonies, the reaction was even stronger. On Mars, miners laid down their tools and held vigils in silence. On Europa, children lit lanterns and released them into the icy skies, each lantern carrying a name: Elias. On New Avalon, workers carved the boy's image into a wall of remembrance, a symbol of what the Dominion had taken. And across every settlement, humans repeated the same vow: never again. The Dominion, far away in their shining capital, dismissed the uproar. To them, this was nothing. They had killed thousands before. One human child was a small matter. Fear would silence them, as it had silenced all others, but the Dominion did not understand humans. When humans grieved, they did not become weak. They became strong. They carried their pain like a torch, and they turned sorrow into strength. And now their sorrow united them in a way nothing else had ever done. In the military academies, young cadets trained harder. In laboratories, scientists worked without rest, creating weapons and defenses designed specifically to counter the Dominion's power. Engineers studied captured Dominion technology and broke its secrets apart, adapting it into something new and deadly. On the outer colonies, civilians volunteered in numbers never seen before. Men and women who had never held a weapon stood in lines asking to be trained. Farmers, doctors, traders, even artists, all wanted to serve. It was not simply war. It was justice. It was a promise that no child would be forgotten. Meanwhile, among the enslaved species of the galaxy, whispers of the humans began to spread. In the underground tunnels of the Yelani resistance, leaders listened to smuggled messages from human traders. They heard about the boy, about the mother's grief, about the humans who swore vengeance. For the Yelani, who had lived under Dominion rule for centuries, it was a spark of hope they had not felt in generations. On the desert world of Kareth, where the insect-like Zir consumed sand and sorrow, elders told their young, "There is a new fire in the stars. It belongs to the humans." And even among the Dominion's own soldiers, unease stirred. They had always believed fear would keep every species silent, but the humans did not look silent. They looked ready. Back on Erebos Prime, the settlers lived with heavy hearts. The riverbanks where Elias once played were now quiet. His carved, toy starship remained where it had fallen, untouched, a small symbol of innocence lost. But the settlers noticed something else too. Human ships began arriving more often, bringing supplies, weapons, and even hidden soldiers. The Dominion patrols still came, but now they were watched carefully, their movements recorded and shared. Beneath the surface, something was building. The mother of Elias, though broken with grief, stood before her community one evening. Her voice trembled, but it carried strength. "My son's life was taken," she said. "The Dominion thinks his death will make us afraid. But my son was not born to be a lesson in fear. He was born to be free. And if he cannot see that freedom, then we must make sure others will." The crowd bowed their heads. For a moment, it felt as if the child was still there among them, guiding them forward. On Earth, humanity's leaders finally reached a decision. They would not remain divided. They would not bow. They signed a pact, the Terran Unity Accord, binding all human nations and colonies together under one command. The Terran Defense Fleet became not just a protector, but the sword of humanity. Admiral Rourke was given command of the fleet, with Minister Joe as political leader of the United Council. Together, they began to prepare. Rourke addressed the Mach fleet in a broadcast that spread across every colony, every station, every ship. His words were simple but unforgettable. They ruled through terror. But they have made a mistake. They have taken what they cannot give back. And for that, we will show them something stronger than fear. We will show them the fury of humanity. The soldiers cheered. The civilians cheered. Even the enslaved species listening in secret cheered. The spark had become a flame. But war was not yet here. Humanity knew they could not strike blindly. They needed allies. They needed intelligence. They needed to understand the enemy they faced. And so human scouts began to move quietly through the galaxy, seeking out old resistance groups, trading information, and building secret alliances. Wherever they went, they told the story of the child. Again and again they repeated it, not to spread sorrow, but to spread resolve. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy stirred. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion felt a shadow on their throne. They ignored it at first, but deep down, some of their leaders began to wonder. Could this new species truly rise against them? Could one child's death really change the fate of an empire? They laughed at the thought, but the humans were already moving. The Dominion believed fear would silence the galaxy forever. They did not yet understand that they had awakened something far more dangerous than rebellion. They had awakened humanity's wrath. And soon, the galaxy would see what that meant. The story of the child had traveled far. By now, there was not a single human colony where his name was not known. From Earth to the frozen domes of Europa, from the deserts of Mars to the green valleys of New Avalon, everyone remembered. Humanity was united in grief, but more importantly, they were united in anger. And anger, when carried by humanity, became something else. It became determination. The gathering of strength in orbit above Earth, the Terran Defense Fleet gathered. Hundreds of ships, from old patrol cruisers to newly built carriers, floated in disciplined formation. Their silver hulls gleamed against the blue curve of the planet. For the first time in history, every human nation had contributed to the same navy. At the heart of the fleet stood the TSF Resolute, the flagship commanded by Admiral Kalen Rourke. Inside its command deck, the Admiral looked out over the stars. His hands rested firmly behind his back, and his expression was carved in stone. "They believe fear will break us," he said to his officers. "But fear has done the opposite. It has united us. It has sharpened us. And now it will drive us to strike." The officers nodded. They were men and women from different worlds, different cultures, even different languages. But here, they stood as one. The scientists race on. Earth and across the colonies, scientists worked without pause. In hidden laboratories, they studied Dominion technology stolen from old battles. They broke it apart piece by piece, mapping every system, every weakness. Dr. Mira Solari, one of the leading engineers, stood in front of a glowing projection. "Their ships are strong," she explained to her team, "but their strength is predictable. They rely on overwhelming numbers, on the fear of their name. They do not adapt, they do not change. But we do. Humans adapt faster than anyone." Her team cheered quietly and went back to work. Every day they created new tools, shields that bent Dominion lasers, missiles guided by advanced AI, drones that could fight even when cut off from their fleet. It was a race of minds, and the humans refused to lose. The civilians resolve. But it was not only soldiers and scientists. On the colonies, ordinary people prepared themselves as well. Farmers turned their fields into training grounds. Teachers turned classrooms into places where young minds learned, not only numbers and history, but also discipline and unity. Artists painted murals of the lost child, reminding everyone what they fought for. On New Avalon, an old man stood before a crowd of young volunteers. His voice was tired but strong. "I cannot fight anymore," he said, "but I can teach, and I will teach you to stand because the galaxy will not free itself." "We will." The crowd cheered, raising their fists. Even those who had never lifted a weapon before now stood ready. The first strike. The Dominion still did not take humanity seriously. To them, the humans were a noisy but small species. They believed the cries of vengeance were just that. Cries. They believed the humans would break when true war came. They were wrong. The first human strike came in the Varos sector, where Dominion fleets had built a fortress to control trade routes. For decades, no one had dared to attack it. The Terran Defense Fleet arrived without warning. Their ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, engines blazing, weapons hot. The Dominion outnumbered them, but humanity had come prepared. Admiral Rourke gave the order. Fire. Lasers cut across the dark, missiles streaked through space, and drones swarmed like steel insects. Dominion ships moved to surround them, confident in their numbers. But the humans fought differently. Instead of following old patterns, they adapted mid-battle. One moment their ships split apart, drawing the enemy wide. The next moment they collapsed together, focusing fire on a single point until the enemy's hull cracked. They used tricks, traps, feints, things the Dominion had never faced before. The battle raged for hours, but when the smoke cleared, the fortress of Varos was gone. For the first time in centuries, Dominion banners were torn down, and in their place, the human flag was raised. The whisper of hope news of the victory spread faster than light. Across enslaved worlds, oppressed species lifted their heads. Could it be true? Could the Dominion be defeated? On Ilani, the underground resistance heard the broadcast of Admiral Rourke's voice. "We fight not only for ourselves," he said. "We fight for every world that has lived in chains. If you rise, we will rise with you. If you fight, you will not fight alone." The Wailani cheered in their hidden tunnels. The Zir elders clicked their mandibles in approval. Even faraway races that had lost all hope began to whisper a new word: humans. The Dominion's rage in their capital world. The Dominion Council met. The great chamber shook with the voices of their leaders. "These humans are reckless," one growled. "They are insects playing at war." "Insects that destroyed Varos," another answered darkly. The Emperor, silent until then, leaned forward. His scaled hands gripped the armrests of his throne. His red eyes burned with anger. "Let them come," he said. "We will drown them in fire. We will crush their spirit as we have crushed all others." But though his words were fierce, unease filled the chamber. No one had ever seen a species fight like this before. No one had ever seen grief turned into such power. The human spirit on Earth, people gathered in massive squares to watch the victory broadcasts. Families cheered, children waved flags, and music filled the air. But there was no arrogance, no pride in conquest. Instead, there was determination. A mother, holding her young daughter, whispered softly, "We do this so you will not grow up afraid." The girl nodded, her eyes bright. The fallen remembered, even as victories began, humanity did not forget its loss. In every city and every colony, there was a place of remembrance for Elias. His name was written in light on the walls of great halls. His story was told in schools. His toy starship, brought back from Erivos Prime, was placed in a glass case inside the Terran Fleet headquarters. Whenever soldiers passed by, they paused for a moment. They did not see just a toy. They saw a reason to fight, to endure, to win. The wrath awakened, and so humanity rose. Where fear had once ruled, now stood courage. Where silence had once smothered, now rang voices. Where grief had once broken hearts, now burned fire. The Dominion had thought they ruled through terror. But terror had awakened something far greater. Humanity's wrath had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The destruction of the Varos fortress was more than a battle. It was a signal. For centuries, the galaxy had lived in silence under the Dominion's shadow. Now that silence was broken. Humanity had shown that the great empire was not invincible. The news spread faster than light, carried by smugglers, traders, and secret transmissions. On enslaved worlds, people whispered to one another. The humans struck back. On resistance stations hidden in asteroid belts, leaders replayed the recordings of Dominion ships burning in the sky. Hope, long buried, began to rise again, and humanity did not stop. The march of the fleet, the Terran Defense Fleet, became a storm moving from sector to sector. Their ships no longer stayed near Earth or the colonies. Instead, they pushed outward, striking Dominion supply lines, outposts, and garrisons. Admiral Kalen Rourke stood at the command deck of the TSF Resolute, watching as stars streaked past. During faster-than-light travel, his officers worked with sharp focus, their eyes on displays showing maps of enemy territory. "We cannot meet them in one great battle," Rourke explained during a council briefing. "They have numbers we cannot match, but numbers mean nothing if they cannot move, if they cannot feed, if they cannot command. We will cut their lines. We will burn their routes. We will take their strength apart, piece by piece. The officers nodded. It was not the strategy of a conqueror. It was the strategy of a predator. The liberation of Kareth. Their next strike was on the desert world of Kareth. The Zir species had lived there for centuries, enslaved and forced to mine the sands for rare minerals. Dominion overseers ruled them, with iron claws, believing the insect-like Zir were too broken to resist. When the Terran fleet arrived, the Krylok garrison prepared for another simple show of dominance. But instead of fear, they faced fire. Human ships dropped from the skies, their weapons hammering Dominion defenses. Soldiers poured onto the surface, not only to fight, but to free. The Zir watched from the tunnels where they had lived in silence for generations. They saw humans, smaller in body than the Krylok, yet standing without fear. They saw them fight with precision, using teamwork, using courage. And for the first time in centuries, the Zir's antennae quivered with something unfamiliar: hope. When the Dominion fell and the last garrison collapsed, the Zir emerged. One of their elders, his carapace cracked with age, bowed before Admiral Rourke. "You fight not only for yourselves," the elder said. "You fight for us all. The Zir will remember." Rourke placed a hand over his chest and answered, "Then stand with us. Together we will end their rule." And so the Zir resistance joined the humans. The fear of the Dominion could not ignore the rising storm. Messages poured into their capital. Fleets destroyed, colonies liberated, soldiers deserting. The Krylok commanders grew restless, their arrogance shaken. In the Emperor's throne room, the council argued. "They strike too fast," one commander growled. "By the time our fleets arrive, they are gone." "They are like fire in the grass," another hissed. "Every spark becomes a blaze." The Emperor slammed a clawed fist against his throne. His eyes glowed with fury. "Then drown them. Send more fleets. Burn every world they touch. Show the galaxy that defiance is death." But though he spoke with rage, he could not silence the whispers spreading even among his own soldiers. Dominion troops had begun to fear facing humans. They told stories of battles where humans fought even when outnumbered, where they refused to retreat, where their fury turned hopeless fights into victory. The Dominion had ruled through terror, but now terror was slipping from their grasp. The human way of war, what made humanity different, was not their weapons. The Dominion's technology was older and often stronger. What made humans dangerous was their way of fighting. They did not follow the same patterns, battle after battle. If the Dominion expected a direct assault, humans struck from the side. If the Dominion built traps, humans found ways to turn them around. If the Dominion thought they had cornered them, humans broke through with reckless courage. Dr. Mira. Solari described it best in her reports. They fight like water. Strike them and they flow around you. Block them and they find another path. They do not stop. They do not surrender. This is why we win. And win they did. The spark becomes a fire. In the months that followed, humanity liberated world after world. Some were small outposts. Some were ancient cities that had lived under Dominion control for centuries. Each time, humans planted not their own flag, but the banners of the freed species. On the icy moon of Talaris, children of the Ilani cheered as Dominion soldiers fled. On the green fields of Arken, entire villages sang songs of freedom. For the first time in generations, everywhere they went, humans reminded the people, "This fight is not only ours, it is yours. Stand with us." And many did. The enslaved began to rise. Resistance cells grew bold. Old fighters who had given up years ago now picked up weapons again. The fire was spreading, the weight of memory. Yet even in victory, humanity did not forget why they fought. In every new base, in every fleet ship, there was a place of remembrance. The name of Elias was always there. His story was told again and again to new allies, to remind them what was at stake. A young soldier aboard the Resolute once asked Admiral Rourke, "Sir, why do we always speak of him? We have lost many now." Rourke placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Because he was the first. His death opened our eyes. If we forget him, we forget why we began. And if we forget why, then we will lose ourselves. The soldier nodded. The memory of the child was no longer just human. It had become a symbol for the whole galaxy. The Dominion strikes back. The Dominion was not idle. Angered by their defeats, they launched counterattacks with massive fleets. Entire armadas swept into human space, burning colonies and hunting the Terran defense fleet. But the humans were ready. Their strategy was never to hold ground, but to keep moving. If the Dominion struck one place, humans attacked another. The Dominion tried to crush them with weight, but the harder they pressed, the more ground they lost elsewhere. One Krylok commander, frustrated after losing yet another fleet, shouted in rage, "They are ghosts! They bleed us in the dark and vanish with the dawn." It was true. Humanity fought like shadows, and the Dominion could not keep pace. The growing alliance, by now, the humans were no longer alone. The Zir fought beside them. The Alani resistance rose openly, guided by human intelligence. Small groups from dozens of species joined, forming the beginnings of a true alliance. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Rourke stood with leaders of different species at his side. "This is not a human war anymore," he said. "This is a war for every world that ever lived under their terror. Together, we are the flame that will burn the Dominion away." The leaders agreed. And in that moment, the first seeds of a galactic coalition were born. The fear reversed. Something had changed in the galaxy. Where once the very name of the Dominion inspired silence, now it was the humans who carried that power. Dominion patrols entered systems cautiously, their soldiers glancing nervously at the skies, afraid of sudden ambush. Civilians whispered to one another, "The humans are coming." But instead of fear, the words carried hope. The galaxy had lived in darkness for centuries. Now, at last, it saw fire, the storm ahead. But even as humanity celebrated, Admiral Rourke knew the war was far from over. The Dominion still held countless worlds, countless fleets. The Emperor would not fall easily. Standing before the stars, Rourke whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning. The hardest battles are still ahead, but we will not stop. We cannot stop." Behind him, the galaxy burned with the fires of rebellion. The humans had awakened, and with them, the entire galaxy was stirring. The Dominion had ruled through terror. Now, terror was their own. And the fire of humanity was spreading across the stars. The Terran Defense Fleet, now joined by allies from countless liberated worlds, moved in silence through the outer edge of the Dominion's heart. Hundreds of ships, shining like stars of steel, cut through the darkness. Behind them, the freed species fleets added weight and firepower, each vessel a testament to the lives that had been saved. At the center of the fleet floated the TSF Resolute, its hull gleaming under the light of a distant sun. On its bridge, Admiral Kalen Rourke stood, his gaze fixed on the blinking markers of the Dominion's core world. It was a planet of black metal and spires, a throne world for an empire that had ruled through fear for centuries. "This is it," said Commander Leora Kane, one of Rourke's most trusted officers. "The heart of their power. Every decision, every plan, they all lead here." Rourke nodded slowly. "It ends today. We do not fight to conquer. We fight to free, and we do not fight alone. Remember that." The final approach, the Dominions. Core World was unlike any battlefield humans had faced before. Massive orbital guns circled the planet like steel moons. Defensive shields glowed with energy that could vaporize any ship foolish enough to enter. Krylok fleets patrolled the skies in perfect formation, ready to crush any threat. The Emperor, seated in his throne of black metal, watched the approaching fleet with his red eyes burning. His scales shimmered in the dim light as his voice echoed through the command chamber. "They come," he said. "Bring them to ruin. Let them feel fear as all before them have." But even as he spoke, a tremor ran through his council. Reports were coming in. Dominion forces were retreating on worlds already attacked. More ships had defected, Entire species that had lived under terror were rising against them. The Emperor's anger was immense, but he began to understand something he had never faced before. Humanity fought differently. They did not bow. They did not break. And now their allies brought the weight of entire civilizations with them. The battle begins. The humans struck first. Using careful planning, the fleet bypassed most orbital guns, concentrating fire on the main shield generators. Missiles streaked through space, lasers tore through armor, and drones swarmed like steel insects, disabling defense satellites one by one. On the planet below, human soldiers and allied forces dropped onto the surface. They moved with precision, avoiding traps, using the terrain, and always remembering why they fought. "We fight for every life taken," shouted Sergeant Rin Tal, leading a squad through the shattered streets of a Dominion city. "We fight for the ones they thought they could silence forever." The Allied forces cheered. They moved with a new energy, inspired by humans and the memory of the child who had started it all. The Emperor's Guard. The Emperor would not face defeat without challenge. From his throne chamber, he unleashed his personal guard. Elite Krylok. Warriors, each stronger and faster than the regular soldiers. They descended onto the battlefield like shadows, cutting down anyone in their path. But the humans and their allies adapted. Small groups of soldiers lured the guard into traps where combined firepower and clever tactics brought them down. Each victory inspired others while the Emperor's confidence began to crack. The heart of the Empire. The fleet above began to pierce the upper defenses of the core world. The shield generators, hit by combined precision fire, flickered and then went dark. The orbital guns, no longer protected, were destroyed one by one. Humanity and its allies moved like a tide, unstoppable. In the throne chamber, the Emperor roared in fury. He sent his final forces to stop the Terran flagship. The Resolute faced the oncoming armada, its crew tense but determined. Admiral Rourke spoke calmly into the comms. "This is the end. Today your reign of terror ends. You ruled through fear. But fear dies when faced with those who refuse to be broken." The words echoed across the fleet. Humans, Zir, Ilani, and countless others prepared for the final strike. The fall of the Emperor. The Emperor fought fiercely. His claws tore through the leading ships, his voice commanding terror as soldiers quaked under his presence. But no single being, no matter how powerful, could hold against the combined strength of countless allies who had nothing left to fear. On the surface, human soldiers and their allies reached the Emperor's palace. They moved as one, breaking through the remaining guards with courage, precision, and unity. At the final moment, Admiral Rourke's fleet fired a concentrated strike directly at the palace core. The structure shook, metal twisted, and the Emperor fell to his knees. "You cannot," he hissed. Rourke, standing with allies on the palace platform, looked down. "We do not conquer. We free. Your reign of terror ends here." And with that, the empire of fear was broken. The liberation across the Dominion's worlds, the news spread instantly. Soldiers who had fought under threat of punishment laid down their arms. Civilian populations, once terrified into silence, stepped forward. Flags of liberation were raised over cities that had never known freedom. Humans moved carefully. They did not take territory to rule. They rebuilt governments, trained local leaders, and helped communities regain control. Every freed world became a partner, not a colony. Every life saved became a promise that tyranny would never return. Even those who had never met a human, who had never seen a battle firsthand, felt the change. The galaxy itself seemed to breathe again, as if the stars had been holding their breath under fear for centuries. The memory of Eliasin, the center of the newly liberated capital, a small memorial had been placed. It was simple. A carved starship, the toy of a boy named Elias, surrounded by flowers and candles from every liberated world. Soldiers and civilians alike stopped to look. They whispered his name, not in sorrow, but in gratitude. He had been the spark. His death had ignited a flame that burned through centuries of terror. Admiral Rourke stood before it with the first human and allied leaders. He showed us what matters most, Rourke said quietly. And because of him, the galaxy is free. The leaders bowed. Across the stars, humans and allies remembered that the fight was not just for victory. It was for life, for memory, for justice. A new beginning. A galaxy was forever changed. Humanity had proven that no empire, no matter how strong, could rule through fear alone. Other species looked to humans with respect, even awe, not because of violence, but because of courage, determination, and the willingness to fight for what was right. Plans were made for a council where all liberated species would have a voice. Humans would not rule them, but would stand alongside them. Together they would ensure that no tyrant could rise again. In space, ships of many colors and shapes moved among the stars. No longer were they hiding or fleeing. They traveled freely, trading, exploring, and helping each other rebuild. The stars had once been places of fear. Now, they were places of hope. The legacy of humanity as humans returned to their colonies. They remembered every life lost. They told stories to their children about courage, sacrifice, and unity. The story of Elias, the child whose death sparked a galaxy-wide uprising, was told in every home. And humanity understood something deeper. Strength alone was not enough. True power came from standing together, from fighting for what is right, from refusing to let fear rule. The galaxy would never forget. Humans had awakened, and in their awakening, they had given freedom to billions. The dominion was gone. The empire of fear was no more. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy smiled under the stars.